Schneider Electric is proud to sponsor this podcast series. With a purpose to empower all to make the most of our energy and resources, our mission is to be your digital partner for sustainability and efficiency. At Schneider, we call this Life is On. Know more at se.com/au. My name is Jo Taranto and I'm joined today by Sean Leyden, Director of KPMG's Frontline Operator Centre of Excellence. And today we're talking about the future of frontline operations in the water sector. Sean, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jo. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You've had a really diverse career, Sean, including a stint in the US Navy, I believe.
Yes.
But you joined KPMG in 2021. And you've been leading the service delivery to organisations which have large, technically skilled workforces who can't perform their jobs remotely. Can you tell us about the research that KPMG have been doing in this space?
Yes. So in August of last year, 2021, we released a thought leadership paper called The Future of Frontline Operations. That paper was targeted more broadly across all sectors, not only water, but all sectors that feature that type of workforce. So the research that formulated the basis of that report was essentially a global research, literature review research project that distilled originally 8 hypotheses, and then through internal testing challenge among many of our leaders who lead work at the partner level in the firm, finally landed on 10 hypotheses about the future of frontline operations by 2030.
And it wasn't just the water industry, as you mentioned, and it wasn't just Australia. Are the insights that you've gained particularly relevant to the water industry?
Absolutely, Jo. My first effort has been to tailor the insights for the water sector. What we found, interestingly, is that the greatest take-up of the thought leadership report, for whatever reason, was made by the water sector. And so I've targeted our work to first sort of narrow in on the relevance of the water sector. And through testing it with clients and through worked examples, we can see that it has been validated.
And you've talked about the fact that this is the sort of workforce that are hard hats, high vis, highly specialized skills. What sort of other industries does this apply to as well?
So we've done a lot of work for power and utilities. So power, electricity distribution and transmission, oil and gas, and we're focusing primarily through a decision of the firm on the gas, natural gas networks, businesses and operators, mining operations. So heavy asset intensive industries that have large workforces delivering safety critical work. And that's a big component of it, is the safety critical nature of the work.
Can you give us a snapshot of what the future of frontline operations might look like for the water sector based on the research that you've been doing?
Absolutely, Jo. I think if it's okay, I'll start by establishing a baseline of what today's worker looks like, what their equipment looks like from a digital perspective. And so right now, generally speaking, frontline workers are receiving information, one-way flow from the office to their a digital tool, which is probably going to be a tablet, computer, or a hardened laptop in their vehicle. They have access to documentation to support their work. They're receiving, again, work orders that direct their work, but it's typically one-way flow where, aside from simple status updates that they can provide. So looking from there to 10 years from now, the frontline worker will have much more decision-making power and the required information to make those decisions at the point of service. They'll be connected digitally to their customer, to their assets, as well as to the back office. So they'll be able to digitally control assets that they're working on just from their current location. They'll be able to provide information that will update customers on the status of their work, and also identify information from customer locations that will inform their work, service history that might have affected an outage or caused a problem, whereas previously they wouldn't have had access to that information. And importantly, I think a technology that's worth introducing is augmented reality. Real quickly, I'll talk about the difference between virtual and augmented reality. So virtual reality is when you're totally immersed in an environment. A good example of that is, in video game locations, they might have a game where you put a virtual reality helmet on and you're immersed in a different environment, whether it's a parachute game or you're walking across the skyline of Melbourne, something like that. In contrast, augmented reality is where the digital environment is superimposed on the real environment. A good example of this is Pokemon Go. And we're talking about hazardous workplaces, though I think for the public, Pokemon Go presented some safety problems with people looking at their phones as they walked around looking for the different characters. But what you have there is a digital environment superimposed on the physical reality. And how this might look for a frontline operator of the future, say 10 years from now, is that through a augmented reality lens, they may be able to look at a pump and see an exploded view of how that pump is put together. Might be able to see flow information for how that pump should be operating compared to how it's operating now based on original equipment manufacturer specifications. They might be able to reach back through a headset to an engineer or a technical support person from an OEM that could provide them information on how to repair the part. They can, through gesture control the pump perhaps, or create isolations through static control of other pumps or valves in the area. So that's a quick snapshot of what the future might look like.
It sounds like a very different world, to be honest. What's the basis for these predictions that you've done through the research?
So reflecting on the report, the 10 hypotheses that we identified, the basis of that is that global research. Also, though, more importantly, it's enriched, that was formed an independent view of what ultimately became 10 megatrends, globally. But then that work is enriched for the Australian context and for different sector contexts by taking advantage of the intellectual, memory of KPMG as leaders work within these different sectors, with having in common, the type of worker and the risks that they face, and then building that into our hypotheses. So the basis is a combination of independent research, enriched by the knowledge and experience in different clients that we work, improving operations on a day-to-day basis, whether it's helping clients rework their operating models to be more responsive, or optimizing operations through improving performance. More importantly these days is assisting in the digital transformation implementation of next generation field management solutions, as well as solutions that pull together data from across a number of different sources to create a common operating picture. So KPMG just did a really good piece of work with Yarra Valley Water, delivering a distribution management system through our AI platform called Arwen. And they now have a live, real-time distribution management system that manages their work. They can see where, for example, outages are affecting real-time which customers down to a street address level, pull up service history to see if that fault might have culminated from work that was done in another part of the network. So the opportunities go on as examples.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Sean Leyden from KPMG. You mentioned, Sean, that the water industry has shown probably the greatest interest in the research. How are people responding?
Just a lot of interest with comment that it's timely. For example, one water utility, as soon as the report was released, we were contacted by the executive leadership of an Australian water utility on the basis that it was exactly the right documentation their board had asked them for as a reference to check their investment in preparing the Frontline for the future. So specifically, their board asked them for an independent piece of thought leadership on the hypotheses that would shape where they should be investing. So a lot of feedback about this is exactly the right paper at the right time. And other interest is we're seeing our hypotheses validated in that a number of clients are beginning to implement next generation field service management solutions, large-scale software investments for organizations that come with it, organizational change, new processes, procedures. This is exactly, validating one of our hypotheses, and so we're working with clients to assist them in that.
I don't expect you to run through all of the hypotheses, but the nature of them, are there implications, for leadership, for technology? What sort of themes come through?
So some key themes includes organizations will need to develop responsive operating models. So they'll have to change the way they do business, not only new ways of working, but new ways of thinking. So this is culminated out of our experience with COVID, bushfires, floods, climate change related disasters. The need to be very responsive in this context is not going to go away. And organizations have learned through COVID that the rapid implementation of technology, moving forward aggressively to support responsive operations, actually has benefits beyond the being able to be resilient in these disruptions. So that's a key one. Another important one is that the frontline operator will more and more provide the customer service experience. In the past and the distant past, organizations of these types, large, heavy asset intensive organizations that perhaps government owned, they weren't so focused on the household customer necessarily. They were focused on the regulatory customer, perhaps. That's completely shifted through over the past 10 years. Water utilities and other utilities and organizations have become very focused on the customer experience. Now that customer experience responsibility will shift more and more to the frontline operator at the point of service, again, because they'll be digitally connected to their assets, to the back office, but also digitally connected to the customer. Those are a couple of examples of some of the most important ones. I think another really interesting one to talk about is the fact that through social consciousness, the people are demanding that organizations get better at eliminating the risk of waste of critical resources, or safety to risks to personnel, or risks of contamination. And so just to maintain a license to operate, organizations like water utilities that are responsible for maintaining the safe provision of high quality drinking water and preventing contamination or cross-contamination of the different water products that they manage, will be required to have digital tools that support the safe operation and do so in an automated way with checks and balances. And even as I reflect back on that example of the frontline operator with the augmented reality support, gesture control, he might have visual representations of safe areas to work, isolations that create a work zone, timeframes for those isolations to expire, where the danger areas are. So visually he might be able to look around through his augmented reality and see where those danger zones are compared to where the safe area of work is, and how long his workers still have left to complete an assigned task before the isolation expires.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Sean Leyden from KPMG. So what should leaders be doing in light of the possible futures described in the research?
Great question, Joe. And I think my answer is that it's time to lay the foundations, and work should be moving forward pretty aggressively on the foundations required to enable these advancements in technology and new ways of working. Reflecting on something I heard the Lord Mayor of Brisbane say in relation to preparing for the Olympics, he talked about his nightmare scenario being Queensland being in the grips of a major drought and not having the water security resources to mitigate those drought conditions. And so people are just talking about the drought, the shortage of water, as opposed to the Olympics at that time. And my point in bringing up his comments is that 10 years is not a lot of time. It was his quote. And so as we look at our research over a 10-year horizon targeting 2030, let's call it 2032 since we're in 2022, work needs to be happening right now. For leaders of these organizations should be laying the foundations in terms of establishing high quality, cleansed sources of data, very clear, standardized processes. These will lay the foundations for artificial intelligence and machine learning. You can't implement artificial intelligence and machine learning unless you have a history of excellent, well-cleansed data in relation to existing processes that have been refined and are highly standardized. They also need to be investing in their information systems, their geographical information systems, and lifting them up to the next level. Because of the level of detail we can now get down to through Internet of Things sensing, you need to have a geographic information system, or GIS, that can leverage that information and provide it to multiple sources simultaneously. They can also be investing in digital twin, a really important aspect of making possible, some of the connections that we're talking about, frontline operators having with their assets, providing information about how things should be working compared to how they are working. Digital twins of their asset base and their networks or treatment plants will be critical to making that possible. So those are a couple of examples. And I think I'd be remiss in saying that it's really important. I come from a background of high reliability operations. You mentioned my Navy experience. I was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot, aircraft carrier based. We had 2 nuclear reactors, an air traffic control environment, and of course the flight deck operations. And these are theoretical examples of something called high reliability operations. And so my point in bringing that up is that in this new context, not only new ways of working, but new ways of thinking will be required. And so that high reliability research points to 5 principles that organizations should start implementing. And these are cultural principles. These are ways of thinking that will be important as we get to this new era of digitally connected assets and greater control at the front line.
There's a lot of information, obviously not just the hypotheses, but emerging technologies, implications for the workforce. Where can people find out more, Sean?
So on KPMG Australia's website, we have an insights webpage that provides access to the report, The Future of Frontline Operations. This is that more generalized report, but the hypotheses are outlined there. That would be a great place to start. And then, of course, contact details are available. I'd welcome interaction, conversations with people to help them explore what's possible as they look forward to the future. I've
been speaking with Sean Leyden, Director of KPMG's Frontline Operator Centre of Excellence. Thanks so much for your time, Sean.
Thank you, Joe. I hope it's helpful.